Welcome to Painting with Commentary for Paint to Life episode 37, the Spawn of Cthulhu. This particular paint job was a Nolzur's Marvelous Miniature Pathfinder Battles Deep Cuts edition. So let's take a look at the inspiration photos that I started with. The picture on the left would be the star spawn kind of coming out of the water, and the picture on the right almost looks like a mind flayer, but that's like a Cthulhu deep one. I like the browns in his skin tone as well. So right off the bat, the first thing I didn't show in the painting, but I did do, was use liquid green stuff to fill the relatively large cracks over this guy's shoulder blades. The arms were pretty big. They were obviously just set in there, and there were pretty big gaps. So we have found ourselves needing to fill those with some of that fun stuff, and the cats are running around upstairs distracting me. So there's your liquid green stuff. Again, you can apply it thick. You're going to paint over it anyways. It'll dry nice and tight and fill all those cracks. Now he also obviously has his wings. If you have this model yourself, you can pull them off. They might be glued, they might take a bit force to come off, but they do indeed come off, and I would strongly suggest it to get access to all this yummy back stuff without having to worry about the wings in the way. So next, I'm using a contrast paint. It's an erythematic blue. I like this blue when using the clear, first of all, when painting any of this clear plastic for these models, I like using the contrast paints. There's just enough shade, like ink in there to tint it, but there's also just enough pigment in there and like, I don't know, I'm no color scientist, but I'll call it cream, to stay on top and leave some topical color. So it's not just a translucent effect we're looking for. Let's say like the yellow I did in my Nightmare video where it was just like pure yellow. It is leaving some pigment behind and a bit of shading as well. But the tip is always start light. This is a very Caribbean looking blue, isn't it? It's very pretty and light, but maybe you think, no, A-Tank, this is going to be like from the ocean. I want it to be dark. Sure, go ahead, do that. Put dark blue on there and watch all of a sudden it looks like he's coming out of space. You have this huge black hole and you won't be able to take it off once it's on there. So start with a light blue and work your way to heavier blues. Same with the shade. If you're going to use a shader, there's I think only one blue shade, nightshade. I would suggest using a lighter blue first, or mixing that with water or some Lamian medium or contrast medium just to thin it, as I will do later in this video. Don't apply it straight or you will find yourself unhappy with the look. So there he is. That's the white. And now another thing, this is going to take many coats. I'm taking my time to apply it generously, but then soaking up any puddles because I don't want any little spots where it's pooled and you have these little dark blue pools everywhere. So I know we're on to the wings now with Death Guard green in the video, but before I wrap up that water, put it on light. You're going to do it multiple times. Just don't let it pool too much, especially around the recesses, or else you're going to, curse yourself later. You'd have all these dark spots everywhere. So back to the greens. Or the wings, I should say. So what was this again? Death Guard green. Very basic paint job this. I mean, I'm painting it to those inspirational photos I showed you. If you're going to paint to something else, feel free to get creative with your color palette. Again, same kind of work applies. I'm using a very big brush because a lot of surface area to cover, but I have thinned the paint quite a bit. You can see it on my wet palette. Don't go heavy. These wings have a lot of little teeny folds all over the place. And if you put too much paint, those folds will fill up with blobs and you'll never see them again if you try and do anything to bring them out later. So nice thin paint going on almost like water. There's a lot of spots where you could see the white through it, and that's fine because I painted these wings just like I painted his body twice. When you do your second coat, you can just focus on the areas that maybe didn't get enough coverage and there's a little white shining through, or gray, the Vallejo primer they use. But don't clog the holes. Don't clog the veins. Don't clog any of that jazz. A nice big brush. I know a good tip the painters will tell you is don't use little brushes for big surface areas. Get a nice big brush to apply a lot of paint very quickly, especially like this. So same color. It's Death Guard green. Yep, Death Guard green. So same color. Again, those shoulders, that liquid green stuff, you can paint over it. It's pretty dark, so it's gonna shine through, especially because I've watered this paint down so much. You can see it kind of shining through, but that's okay because recall we're gonna give another coat to this. Now be gentle around these water areas. We can fix mistakes, but we don't want to have to waste time doing that. And I'll also suggest that under his tentacle beard there are lots of spaces, little nooks and crannies. Do your best to flip the model to get up under there, but don't worry if you've missed a spot when you're reviewing it later and see a big white patch. Again, easy enough to tidy up. Let's think, what else was I thinking when I was painting this guy? Yeah, I actually missed one of his eye sockets completely when I went to do a second layer, and there was an entire, like he had white eyeshadow on because it had been completely missed by my first round of paint, and that's okay. So if you make a mistake and accidentally paint on some of this blue, obviously quickly get a wet brush, put lots of water on it, and then wipe that away with the wet brush, because that will work very well. We'll take the paint right off before it dries, and if it dries we can use some the stuff they put, acetone that they put in nail polish remover. Put a little on a garbage brush and brush it away, and it'll melt it off for you, and then you don't have to worry about it being there anymore. It'll also take the blue undertone off, the stuff you have on the plastic, but that's easy enough to put back on. So also a couple things to note here. One of his arms, his left arm, is completely covered by water. Unlike the right arm, which the water is only coming from the bottom, the left arm is completely translucent in the center, which is great. But as we're about to get into talking about, we don't want to ignore the fact that under that water is a green tentacled monster. So don't just paint the water arm the way I did. Make sure you gently, with some watered down paint, paint it green as well, as I'm about to do here, although I didn't have a good angle. But see, I am painting that arm green. And like I said, we're going to touch on that in a second here. It's not a transparent arm with water, made of water. It's not a water elemental with a water arm. That water would be very thin and dripping off, and while it is cool and it's a cool effect, we don't want him to have a glowing blue arm. Maybe I didn't paint it in there, but we'll catch it. Let me show you more about what I'm talking about. Take a look at this miniature and this picture beforehand, before I started to paint him. See, after I paint him green, see under his abs, it's clear. And I see so many people paint clear minis like this. The body does not stop above his belly button, okay? There's something there. It goes all the way underwater, and it should not look like this. So the trick to painting that without losing the cool water effect is as follows. It's a hollow shell you're holding. Flip it over and paint the inside where his body will be. In this case, it's 360 degrees. I'm going to paint the entire inside of that cone because his entire torso, all of his body is there, whether it's coated with primer there or not. And the reason for that is once you paint the inside of that hole and look at it again, check it out. See how it looks like under the water there, behind his back, by his ass? You can actually see through the water. You can see the rest of the creature. Very important. Other WizKids miniatures do this. The crocodile in the water, the shark jumping out of the water. Don't forget to paint the underside of your clear plastic so you can see what's actually under the water. And that's what we're going to do in this next step. I'm painting 360 degrees and all those clear parts so that when it dries, and you'll have to put multiple coats on depending on how deep the water is and how dark you want it to be, plus painting that clear plastic, see how it just kind of beads away. I should have washed this mini first, but when it's done this way, you're gonna have a really cool effect. Now for the layering aspect here in the light areas, I'm using Nurgling green on top of the Kraken. Now these tentacles will also be painted over later, but it's good to do these light areas. I was going to do light on top. The median would stay the color that the rest of the, did I call it a Kraken just there? The middle layer would stay the color of the body of the star spawn, and then the darker color would go on the bottom. But as I painted them, that was not what I wanted. And ultimately I'm going to touch on these later with that brown color as well. So for now we're just going to watch me paint this Nurgling green on. But also when you're painting, you want three tones, right? Like a mid-tone and a dark tone and a light tone. If he's the mid-tone, and that's the Death's World green, then or Death Guard green, sorry, then the Nurgling green is the light, and then Death World Forest is my dark. So before you paint, you should have your colors, and if you don't have three different color greens, you can use one color and add white to it and dark and black to it to make three distinct colors. Just make sure you realize how much you made. So when you need to whip up some more later, you know that it was like 1 part black to 2 part green, etc. Keep kind of an idea of that. So here I'm just filling out, and now we're going to move into his off-screen painting with GM can't hold his shit together. There we go, Death World Forest. So he's got these little nodules on his head, which I'm hitting with the Death World. Also the sunken part of the eye, it's going to be darker along the cheekbone. Anywhere I'm highlighting now using a dark and a light color respectively. You know, another thing is the color science about miniature painting is a really fascinating topic. Plenty of YouTubers cover it. I knew at this point I was going to be covering this guy in realistic water. See what I'm doing right now? I'm just taking this Death World Forest green here and putting it just kind of all over gently, thinly with my brush, almost like a high level layer. I want to like modeled kind of appearance, because ultimately when I douse this guy in realistic water later, a lot of this subtlety is going to be lost under this sheen, but I wanted it to look kind of realistic. So there it is, and now I'm putting again, I'm kind of putting this Death World Forest on top of all over the place. Back to our niblet green, or Nurgling green for these little patches. Also look at his left arm, what I was talking about earlier. You can see that looks green because I put gently, especially on the inside of the arm, it's painted green. So the outside looks blue, but you can see, because the blue is transparent, you can see through to the inside of the arm, which is painted green. So similar to how I painted underneath. And that, for anyone who follows me on Instagram, that was kind of the Work in Progress Wednesday tip that I had. I think it's a big one. I see a lot of people make that mistake when I look at finished miniatures. So again, Death World Forest on these spines, like these draconic kind of wings that have these big spines that run through them and stick out, just using a dark section to help highlight. So I'm going to paint these wings, and again, it's the same way I painted the rest of the mini, so it's nothing that too exciting. And after this, we're going to go back to the water with another application of some contrast paints. I'm just thinking about things that came to mind here. No. Again, when painting dragon spines of the like, just take your time. You can either paint the whole wing and then highlight the spine, or you can paint the spines and try and paint between them. Personally, I like painting the whole wing and then highlighting the spines. I find I can draw a fine line, a little more controlled up, down, hit that spine with a shot, as opposed to trying to paint between the spines. If that makes sense to you. Now take a look here. We're back to the aromathatic blue, but this time I've added to it, and I added some contrast medium. It's a technical paint from Citadel. Basically what it is like an unpigmented paint. So it's like white, like milk. And you mix them. So I mixed them with the contrast. And what's the point of this, Mike? Well, let's take a look. You see my first coat went on there pretty nicely? Great. I want to add another coat, but I don't want it to get so dark that it blots out the details. So by cutting it and thinning it, I protect myself from this. Now this beautiful color that just went and gone, I missed it. It was something blue. It's a contrast Talisar blue. This is awesome, but it's only for the bottom, not on his body. It's going to pool at the bottom anyways, and I'm keeping it also to the edge. I want this to be the deep water, and it'll blend nicely with the top. Now, how's this? This is my little palette. I took this old little scrap base from some other mini. I painted some of the different greens and lines and a couple contrast paints of brown. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply different contrast paints. So the far right is Basileum Gray, and then beside it is Basileum Gray with contrast medium. Then the far left is what I end up using with this Griff Charger Gray, and the one beside it is Griff Charger Gray with contrast medium. So I did this to see what it would look like painted on the Cthulhu Spawn of Star Spawn. I use that as a template. Okay, now that I've done that, I know that I like Guilliman flesh more so than the Dark Oath flesh. That was the two on the bottom I never mentioned, but I also cut it with contrast medium though, because in my tests I realized, geez, it goes on really dark. You can see it looks pretty dark here too. That's nothing compared to what it would be if I put it on straight. And I want this, if you remember my source photo on the right at the beginning, I want it to be a light brown, not too much. Now this same thing here, Griff Charger Gray. I did two versions, one where it was cut with contrast medium and one where it was just straight. The straight was way too dark, way too blue. What I want is like a reverse dry brush here. I want this to settle in all those little nooks that we didn't clog with paint earlier because we thinned our paint the hell out. See how this blue is settling in there, and it's sort of floating on top, but it's settling in all those little creases? That's what I was trying to put paint into, not the top of the wing. So if I had used full strength blue, Griff Charger gray, I mean, it would have been all over the place. It would have been a mess. So cut it, and if you don't have contrast medium, because it's a technical paint not everyone has access to, you can use water. It's pretty similar. So now you can see his head is dried, nice, and it's not so dark. It doesn't look brown. It looks like a mushroom cap on top of the green. Now I'm painting this Griff Charger gray on top of the actual shoulders and back of the creature as well. But because it's cut with that medium or water, in both cases they work similarly, it's gonna make sure that he looks green first. And all this is gonna do is highlight, just like a wash, like a gnome oil. It's highlighting the crevices and it's gonna make them kind of blue, but not so much that it looks like he's blue. Just kind of a green blue. Okay, and you can see how I've got that on a paper towel because those contrast paints on the base were so thick, especially on the edge, they're kind of bleeding. I didn't want to make a mess everywhere, but that's okay because remember, that's the deep water, so it should be dark blue around the edge. And here we are. It's looking pretty good. You can't really put too much of this on. Make sure you put it on the head too, because even though it's a brown cap, okay, yeah, let's take a look. It's dried there. Good. Now this is our dry brushing part. Imric blue. So Imric blue is a nice dry brush color. I'm only putting it on the waves, not the bottom. I don't want it on the ocean. I only want it on the waves. So where the wave comes up. And I'm not putting this on his arms because I want it to be really transparent on the arms where the water is dripping off of the body, just for the waves. The waves are being stirred up, kicked up, and they are indeed a little more blue than the rest of the ocean because the light's hitting it and it's aerating it, right? And the same with why we're using this white. Praxetti white, again, a dry brush application, little stippling just on the crest of the waves, not down too far. You know, it's only where the water is coming up as he's going raw, splashing out. That's where the wave head would come, not down low. And don't put too much on either. See, I just wiped it on my hand because there's a little too much on my brush. So just wipe it off on your hand or on your paper towel. And you can put a little darker at the top of the waves than at the bottom of the waves. And again, keep it to the waves, not on his arms, not on his body. It's just for those waves where they break. Lovely. Now, this product from Woodland Scenics, it's called Realistic Water. This goes on, I've used this in other dioramas, the Silver Dragon, Argentus. I used it on the Trient, Arbogast, when we made the little rivers and stuff. If you leave this in a pool, like 1/8 of an inch thick, it'll dry. It'll look like water in a bowl, but you know, it's kind of like using a resin, like a 3D UV resin, but it's cheaper. It's made of acrylic. It takes a while to dry, but by applying it by brush, I'm putting a lot on there. It's thick. Putting it on there so that it looks like water. And see how much I'm putting on? Letting it drip. It's like caramel sauce. Pour that all over. It doesn't matter if it goes pools at the bottom because the bottom is where the water is. This is different than using like a Liquitex gloss finish because that looks wet. That looks shiny. This looks wet, right? And we're about to get into the finished picture so we can see how this looks. So I'll spread that over. So here we go. So you can see different spots, even the tips of his wings and claws where some of that realistic water had pooled. See the base of his abs. You can see right through that transparent water. You can see the green through the other side. Even look at his left arm there. See, it's blue and dripping, but it retained that light blue because we never put any of the dark blue on it. Beautiful. I did his eyes white, didn't cover that in the paint. Again, if we hadn't painted the inside there, he would have this torso that just stopped halfway at his belly button. That would look ridiculous. And you can see his hand, all those little blue chunks. That's from that Griff Charger gray. All in those little folds and creases on the back of his head too. I loved it. It was great. Very simple model to paint. I also, when I was finished, I glued it to the black disc it came with just because there's a hollow hole. I didn't want to leave it hollow. So there it is on the disc. Paint the outside edge to a dark blue and that's it. That's the Star Spawn of Cthulhu. Looks great lit up like that. You can see through it in the spots that you should see through it. I think it looks very much like an octopus on his head with that brown mixing with the green. I'm very happy. I hope you liked this. If you did, leave a comment in below, like the video, share it if you'd like to, and again, thank you very much for spending your time with me. I'm GMA Tank, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.